Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and today I wanted to cover the topic of thrusters and how they're being designed to work and how that corresponds with what we're seeing on the stats pages of ships. First off, the old system that used the TR measurements or thrust rating, that went away a long time ago with the rework to the Matrix. It was an easy system to think about because it was essentially the power that was associated with each of the individualized thrusters, but now we move to an approach where you have this overall pool of thruster power, so there isn't a real clear-cut way to say this thruster is capable of this output, because at times it's going to be using none, or it could be using almost all of the dedicated pool of thrust power. And if you think about the fuel mechanics video I did not too long ago, I talked about the power plant and how it energizes plasma and distributes that to the thrusters when you move your ship. Now, I think the best way to think about the overall pool of thruster power that you have is how much of this energized plasma you have available for each maneuver you're trying to make, and how your ship must distribute that amongst your ship's thrusters. That's a different thought process than thinking of each having its own little power plant and energy source. Now, if you consider that a primary thruster or a main engine is capable of much more output than like a small maneuvering thruster should be, there has to be caps on what each type can actually use. So the idea of thrust value from the old TR system still makes sense, but it's just kind of a different way of thinking about things. So even though there's not a rating to say how much your thruster can actually use, there's still a hard cap on how much it can actually output. Now, the size of maneuvering thrusters and just thrusters in generally has changed. It's actually been removed. The idea now is that you can swap out thrusters that you like, but it's going to be done in a complete ship set. So you may have the option to buy industrial, military, or civilian types of thrusters, but they're likely going to be locked to your ship type, and it's going to limit your options. So maybe you have like Aurora Industrial, Aurora Military, Aurora Civilian, that type of thing. Now, I don't really care for that approach too much because it just doesn't really match the way they were handling the other ship components, but they're also not in game yet to really criticize how it all works out. But even if they are saying that size is no longer considered on the Matrix, it's important to know that ships have different sizes and capabilities from their thrusters. Just because an Idris and an Aurora don't have sizes that differentiate them on the Matrix, don't assume that they're the same size, type, or have the same capability. I think that's where we get into some of the confusion on this that could be addressed in a different way by providing a different sort of, nomenclature to it. Now, as far as the categories go, you have four types to think about here. The first is going to be your main thrusters, which is the one that gives you thrust from the rear of the ship to make your ship move forward. The main or primary thrusters are going to be normally your most powerful and important thrusters to supply power to. Now, on the flip side of that value and the flip side of your ship, you also have retro thrusters, which are typically positioned on the front of the ship and are used to help you stop. They fire from front to back to help your ship decelerate completely or just to slow you down. Then you end up getting into VTOL, or vertical takeoff and landing thrusters. Not all ships actually have these on board because some can really just use their maneuvering thrusters, to handle getting up and down on surfaces. Now, larger ships that need the extra help, or even smaller ships that are just designed by role to need to be able to gracefully land and take off, may end up having these present, but they're typically multi-purpose types of thrusters that may act in a maneuvering capability, but are designed to kind of rotate down to kind of help with easing the ship to the ground, and then adding in the extra ability to help you get off of the surface, and then typically rotating into a different position. And the last category we're going to talk about is maneuvering thrusters, which actually come in two flavors, fixed and gimbaled. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the term gimbal, it's essentially a mobile option, and this applies to weapons too. So think of a thruster that's actually mounted on a ball that can then rotate around, meaning it can fire in any range that's within its motion. You may hear fixed after that and think to yourself, well, that's clearly a downgrade, and I can see why, but fixed actually have some very real value associated with them. A gimbaled thruster is going to be required to move into the direction it needs to face before firing off, which sacrifices time and lowers responsiveness, which correlates directly into your ship's agility. A fixed thruster fires immediately, but comes at the requirement that you have more of them, at least 12, in order to actually be able to handle all the vectors and moves that your ship is going to need to be able to fly in this space environment. Gimbal thrusters allow for less thrusters on the ship just numerically, but they take longer to fire, and they do require a little power from the plant, which is also going to increase your signature to move before firing off. That requirement means that even if your thruster isn't actually damaged, an issue with your power plant could impact your thruster's performance too. So that would be the case even without damage. You know, if you're running components that just suck too much power out of your power plant, your thrusters may not end up getting what they need to move. Now, you generally should see smoother and kind of controllability of the ship improved for fine movements when you have gimbal thrusters, but as we talked about, there's certainly some downsides and risks of running those. So that today is how thrusters are being designed, it's how they're being displayed on the Matrix, it's how they're performing today and being implemented into the game. Now, once we actually have the option to start swapping these out, I'll start doing testing on the impact that these have to your performance and your signature and more. If you guys have any questions about any of this, please ask. Otherwise, stay tuned for a lot more coming soon. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.